Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Steph. So today we were doing the 4 and 5 star reads of September and October because I missed September. I've been marathoning a lot of series. I say a lot. It's only been like 2. So I'm going to talk about all of those books as a whole because most of them I've given pretty similar ratings. So firstly, I've been making my way through Throne of Glass. This is a partial reread for me. When I first started reading the Throne of Glass series, the first 4 were out and the 5th one was about to be published. So I have read up to Queen of Shadows and I have read The Assassin's Blade before, but anything after that I have not read, so that's why it's a partial reread. But now in my partial reread, I have read Throne of Glass, which I gave 4 stars, Queen of Shadows, which I gave 4.5 stars. I've read Heir of Fire, I gave it a 3.5, and Assassin's Blade, which I gave 4 stars. So I've mainly been giving them all similar ratings. Even on my first read, I remember Heir of Fire not being my favorite, so this wasn't super surprising. I feel like I'm having very similar reactions and feelings as the first time reading this series, and honestly, I'm really enjoying my time rereading this. I'm really looking forward to where the series goes. But if you've never read Throne of Glass and maybe you've seen it around but don't know what it's about, Throne of Glass is about our main character, Celaena, and by the time we meet her, she is 18 years old and she has been a slave in the Endovier salt mines for about a year. And the king is looking for his champion and he's doing it kind of by trials. So Daryan, the king's son, decides that he wants Celaena to be his champion and to compete in this competition to be the king's basically assassin, but they're calling it the king's champion. It's an assassin. Celaena's background is that she, up until going to Endovier, had been the most notorious assassin in Otterland. So Daryan believes that she obviously can win this competition as she was the most notorious assassin in Otterland. As she goes through this competition, things kind of go awry, and a lot of plot points are revealed in this first book that begin to expand and create various different plot points in the rest of the series, which gets very complex and there's tons of characters, and I'm really enjoying how complex and how well thought out most of the series has been. There is so much foreshadowing that you can kind of just glaze over, and then you'll have like an epiphany moment where you're like, wait, Sarah has talked about this before. So I really think that this is well plotted out and well structured, and there's a lot of fun foreshadowing. So I'm really enjoying my time. I definitely think that, like, yes, this is a fantasy romance, but it definitely leans harder on the fantasy than the romance as of right now. I do know for the most part who Endgame is for Celaena, which I'm really interested to see how that plays out and how I end up feeling about it. I also kind of already know a spoiler about a few other ships that happen in this book, and I'm very excited, particularly for one, because I just think it's going to be incredible. And then the second series, where I gave very similar ratings for most of the books, was the Chestnut Springs series. I marathoned the Chestnut Springs series, all but the first one. I read the first one in February, and then I read the last 4 in like a week. So the Chestnut Springs series is by Elsie Silver, and it follows various different couples. All of the male love interests in this series are related or best friends. So a lot of the women are kind of coming from different backgrounds, and I felt that I connected most to the women in this series. But I gave Heartless a 4.5 stars. I gave Powerless a 3 stars. I gave Reckless a 4.5 stars. And I gave Hopeless a 3.5 stars. I know for certain that Heartless and Reckless are my 2 favorite books in this series. They also have my favorite female protagonists in this series, and I just loved these romances. I think it's really funny because it solidified for me that I love a single dad trope, and maybe I do enjoy people having babies. I don't want that for me personally, but I think it's so fun when other people love being parents and they're good at it, you know? And in these books, I feel like that's pretty accurate. So I'll take you through the couples, but I'm not going to go too in depth about the synopsis of these. In Heartless, you have Willa and Cade. Cade is a single father. Willa is much younger than him. I think she's 10 years younger than him, so it also has an age gap. She also becomes his nanny, so, you know, getting with the nanny. And I just love the way that Willa loves. She is so fierce and bold with her love, and I really, really, really enjoyed reading from her POV. She is probably my favorite heroine of this series, and then it would be Winter. But I really enjoyed the tropes in here, and I enjoyed how it played out. Then we have Powerless, and Powerless is a childhood friends to lovers romance. This follows Sloane and Jasper. Sloane is the cousin to all of the brothers in the series, and Jasper happens to be like the adopted friend, now brother type of situation. So they've grown up around each other, but they're not actually related. And like I said, I gave this a 3 stars, so it wasn't really my favorite. but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. And then we have Reckless, and Reckless is about Winter. Winter happens to be Summer's sister, and Summer is the heroine in Flawless, which is the first book in the series, and her love interest is Theo, and Theo is Rhett's best friend, who is the male love interest in Flawless, again the first book in the series. So the trope in here is accidental pregnancy, and I love it. I ate it up. This was one of my favorites, mainly because of Winter. Winter was really going through it. In this book, she had a lot on her plate and a lot that she was trying to deal with, but also she's combating the way that people view her and believe her to be. And so I just loved this one. I loved Winter. I loved Theo. I also think Theo is the one male love interest in here that sticks out the most to me, and Cade probably comes second, which also explains why I love these two books the most, because I will admit by the end of the series, after marathoning it, a lot of the men in here sort of just bled together. They were very similar to me, which is not a horrible thing. And then Hopeless follows Beau, who is the youngest brother. He was also in the military, and Bailey. And Bailey comes from a family with a very bad reputation for drugs and just sort of being menaces around the town. And so because of her family, a lot of people believe many things about her that aren't true. And so she is working really hard at a bar to save money to get out of this town and go to school and make a better life for herself. This is also an age gap romance, and it is a fake dating trope as well. So I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. Since we're talking about romance, we can talk about Vampires of El Norte. I read this in September, and it's probably going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I loved this so much. It was so unexpected because when you go into this book, you kind of think it's going to be like a paranormal horror about vampires, and it's actually a romance. And to be more specific, it's forbidden love. So our two protagonists are Nena and Nestor, and they have been friends since they were young. When they're 13 years old, it's sort of becoming a little romantic, but Nena comes from a ranchero family, and at this point her family is sort of deeming this relationship between her and Nestor as inappropriate, and she needs to be thinking about who she's going to marry that is going to benefit their family and their ranch. And so they're kind of trying to keep them apart, and at night Nena and Nestor sneak out together to go on adventures, and one night they go on an adventure and Nena gets attacked by a creature. Nestor thinks that she is dead, brings her back to her family, and her family runs him off. So then you fast forward 9 years, and it turns out that Nena survived the attack, but Nestor has no idea that she's still alive. So to Nena, she just thinks that Nestor left her that night with no explanation. So when the border wars between Mexico and Texas start to become really intense, most of the rancheros decide that they want to go to the border to try to fight the Yankees themselves. So Nestor is called back to the ranch to fight in this war, and he comes face to face with Nena, and they have to spend this book working out everything between them. And Nestor is perfection. He is just the perfect character for me. I don't often, as you can tell from when I was talking about the Chestnut Spring series, I often connect to the female love interests in anything way more than the male love interests. It's just kind of a trend that I've been noticing with myself. But this was one of the few times where Nestor was my man. I was obsessed with him. His poetic lines, the way he would talk about Nena, the way he was pining so hard after her, and if you know me, pining is my favorite thing in the world. So the way he pined after her just got me. Like, he is the star for me in this book, and I love Nena. I think she's feisty and she's funny, and I really enjoyed her, but there was just something about Nestor pining so hard after her that really got me. So as you can tell, the vampires are not really at the forefront of the story, but they are a huge part of what pulled this couple apart and is pushing them together, because vampires are an actual creature that exists in this world. They're not the vampires that you think of when you hear vampire. It's not like the vampires in Twilight or in Interview with a Vampire. They are very much creatures, but they're also a metaphor for the Yankees / the United States and their ability to suck the land dry. So I really enjoyed the fact that vampires were not only a creature that existed in this book, but they were a metaphor for the United States and colonization. And I think that it was explored fairly well. But I ended up giving this a 4.5 for a few reasons. I think that despite me enjoying the vampire aspect of this, I did feel like I wish we got more about the lore of the vampires, only because there's a specific situation that happens at the end of this book that makes you want to know more about the vampires. I think I would have been fine by the end of this book if we didn't have this specific situation. And I feel like some of the conflicts that happen happened here came to a resolution really conveniently, and it sort of bothered me, especially for how hard we had to fight for a lot of things in this book. So for certain things to resolve so seemingly quickly, it was a little jarring. But otherwise, I gave this a 4.5. I absolutely loved it. I will definitely be reading The Hacienda. And then in September, for the Literally Dead book club, I ended up reading Monstrillo, and I ended up loving this. So Monstrillo is pitched as a mother losing her son and what lengths she will go to bring her son back. And that is true. That is the core of this book. But this switches between 4 different perspectives, and it's more of a family saga. But it still begs the question of what would you do in your most desperate moments of grief, especially for a child, and to what lengths would you go for that child? And I think that those questions are very much answered in this book. But I do think that if you went into this just wanting kind of a mother dealing with grief and dealing with those complex feelings of losing a child and wanting to bring that child back and it getting kind of weird, that's not really what you're gonna get. So I think the expectations for this book, especially the way that it's been marketed, were off, because I even thought this book was something that it absolutely isn't. I have this weird comparison for it. If you've read Our Share of Night, this felt very similar to that, not in necessarily all of the themes, but the way that it's told, because Our Share of Night is also told in parts, and those parts follow different people for the most part. And there's a lot of dealing with grief and trauma, and there is a lot of sex in this book. And I think the reason for that is that it's trying to destigmatize sex and sexuality, especially queer sex, and Our Share of Night did that same thing. So this book was definitely so different than what I expected, but I ended up loving it, and I gave it a 4.5 stars. It will also be one of my favorite books of the year. And I will link the Literally Dead book club discussion that we had, because I think we explored so many interesting topics about this book that I didn't even think of until we had our discussion. And I was just really appreciative of being able to be a part of that conversation. So then moving into my last 4-star read, I ended up reading Mile High by Liz Tomford. This is the beginning of a romance series called the Windy City series. So it's set in Chicago, and this mainly follows athletes. So the male love interests in all of these books are athletes, and then the women, for the most part, for what I know, are not. So in Mile High, we have our love interests, Stevie and Xanders. And so Stevie is a flight attendant for professional athletes, and Xanders is a hockey player. So she is the flight attendant for Xander's team. And Stevie is going through this really intense mental journey and like self-love journey, because she has spent many years in these fake friendships who were trying to use her because her brother is a professional basketball player. And she also has a lot of body image issues because she's a bit curvier than many of the women that she's surrounded by. Not only do those women like to point it out, but so does her mother. On top of that, she's not very trusting in general of men, and so she's not really looking for anything serious. She's just trying to live her life. And then you have Xanders, and Xanders has built a reputation for himself of being a playboy. He is never pictured with the same woman twice, and he's also known to be an asshole, so he likes to start fights on and off the rink. Is that what you would call it? I don't want hockey. And because Stevie does not care about his shenanigans at all, and she has absolutely zero interest in him, he becomes a little bit obsessed with her, and he wants to make her life as hard as possible because he can't understand why this woman, or any woman, would not have an instant attraction to him. And so I'm not gonna lie, I really struggled with Xanders as a character, and it wasn't until the middle of the book that I realized that I was kind of loving him as a character, because when he really loves someone, he loves them hard. And I think that he had such great character growth. But I also kind of love when the bad guy who's built this specific reputation for himself is the complete opposite of what that reputation is. So in the end, I ended up really enjoying Xanders as a character, but Stevie was the star of the show. I love Stevie. I related to Stevie a lot, but there was just something about her in general that was so like sweet and loving. And I also love that she just didn't give a shit about Xanders. She was really like, okay, I know that you are attractive and I know that you sleep around with a lot of women. Cool. Can I just do my job? Also, she's a huge animal lover like myself, and I really enjoyed that little plot line. My only issue with this book, other than Xanders at a time, my real big issue with this book is it's too long. And this is coming from somebody who loves Mariana Zapata, who is not afraid of 500 pages of a book. Like, I love chunky fantasy books. I don't mind long romance books, but there's just something about this series that we spend too much time on really mundane things, or things get really repetitive. And I don't know if it's because this is Liz Tomford's first series that she's been writing, so I'm sure she'll get better with each publication. But I don't know, I just felt every single page of this book, which doesn't usually happen to me when I'm really wrapped up in a book. But yeah, I just think there was too much repetitiveness, and I think that we spent too much time on things where my interest was wavering way too often. So yes, I did give it 4 stars, but I think it has its flaws. I don't think the writing is that amazing, but I've been really forgiving about it because it is a debut novel. But otherwise, I think Liz Tomford really knows how to write chemistry, and I think it's really palpable, and I think the spicy scenes are done really well. And then lastly, I wanted to put up a few books that I've read recently to educate myself about Palestine. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about these, but the 4 books that I have read to try to educate myself about Palestine is On Palestine by Noam Chomsky and Gaza and Crisis, also by Noam Chomsky. I also just finished the 100 Years War on Palestine, which honestly, if you're going to start anywhere, I feel like this is such a good place to start. And I read The Salt Houses. So these are 4 recommendations that I can give to educate yourself about Palestine. So yeah, those were my recent reads, and I will talk to you next time. Bye, friends.